everybody. Nice to see some familiar faces and meet some of you guys for the first time. My name is Cristina, and I'm the CEO of Pandium and the co-founder of the SaaS Ecosystem Alliance, which is putting on this panel. So today we are so excited to welcome an amazing panel of folks who've led teams to manage large tech ecosystems in best-in-breed companies. This panel is scheduled to run until 3:40, and I want to leave about 10 minutes at the end for audience questions. We do have some questions that have already been submitted, but if anyone has a question in the audience, you can use the little Q&A Zoom feature, and we will try to get through as many as we can at the end. Anything that we don't get through, we'll throw into the Slack group so folks can brainstorm there. So without further ado, it would be great to do some intros. So maybe if everyone can share who you are, where you work, what you do, and then we can dive right into some questions. So I'll start with Scott, since you're unmuted.
Okay, hi, great to be here. I'm Scott Brinker. I'm the VP of Platform Ecosystem at HubSpot.
Awesome. Shay?
I'm Shay Howe, Senior Vice President of Platform Strategy over at ActiveCampaign.
Nice to meet you. Bader?
Hi, everyone. Bader Hamdan. I am Head of Platform Partnerships at Twilio.
Nice to see you again. And Heidi?
Hi, I'm Heidi Williams, and I'm a Director of Engineering at Grammarly, where I lead Grammarly Business and our new product, Grammarly for Developers.
Awesome. So we'll run this just sort of like a roundtable. I'll look for folks that are unmuting to see when I think they want to chat. But yeah, anyone in the group who has any questions, please feel free to submit. Let's get started. So question first, top of the panel. How do you build an internal company culture that values integrated tech ecosystems? Scott.
Wow, okay, I just pulled off the mute for open conversation. That'll teach me. I don't know, I guess a couple thoughts come to mind. Is first of all, I think it's actually gotten a lot easier in recent years. I feel like when I was first doing this, even the concepts of platforms and ecosystems were pretty esoteric. You know, there were a few businesses where that was thriving, but it wasn't sort of a mainstream concept. And it feels like in the past few years, you know, at a general business level, people have become much more aware of the power of ecosystems. There's that whole book, Platform Revolution. So that's the first thing I do is I get everyone a copy of Platform Revolution. But I'd say the other thing I'll put on the table is we've had a lot of success at HubSpot, but just keep coming back to the customer. Like the entire reason we're doing these tech partnerships or opening this up is there are things customers want, there's use cases they want, there's integrations to things in their tech stack, you know, and as long as all of the company culture is around how do we make customers happy, you sort of fit the partnerships right into that framework.
I'd love to add something there too, which is you can also really make it part of your company's strategy in a way that feels like obvious that then it ends up being part of your culture. And so just thinking back to when I was at Box, you know, our strategic advantage was that we were sort of Switzerland between Microsoft and Google. Maybe Microsoft and Google would never actually engage in the kind of tech ecosystem partnerships that we could. And we wanted to be the product that worked wherever you worked. And so it ended up being sort of a critical part of our competitive advantage, and also that we could partner with both Microsoft and Google, even though they were also competitors, and they would probably never partner with each other. So I think there were some really interesting opportunities, and that ended up helping it kind of soak into the whole DNA of everything that we did.
I would add, I agree definitely with Scott and Heidi and what they're saying. It's not an easy task, or it hasn't been, but it's become a lot more acceptable. I think, it goes back to that whole build by partner strategy, right? Every company is thinking through it from a product perspective. You look at technology partners, ISVs, right, alliances to either fill a gap or in your product portfolio or augment, solutions. So you're tackling a market opportunity together. But the realization, I think, that enterprises are very ecosystem reliant is kind of hitting home, and it's making that, building up that platform, that ecosystem less frictionless, or a lot easier, I should say, than it has been in the past, because it's, hey, there's a new way of actually doing business, going to market, and co-selling, co-building, co-marketing. So.
Shay, anything to add?
No, I think Scott, Heidi, Badir are right on the money. listen to your customers for sure. I would say the creating the culture of it is tying it to the company plan, right? Like you got to make sure it's not seen as a side project or some experiment. And I think like follow your customers, tying it to that customer plan or the top line plan, making it a lever of growth helps you do that. So nothing more meaningful to add than what these folks covered. They know what they're talking about.
That's why we're all here. Cool. So kind of leading into the next question, what do you think are the biggest challenges rather around measuring business value in tech partnerships? And have you guys seen or been at any companies that do that exceptionally well? I think attribution and ROI is something that comes up a lot when thinking about these kinds of initiatives. Shay, go ahead.
I can start. Well, like Cristina, you said the first word, and that's attribution, right? Like I'm always kind of amazed just amazed to see like at times there is no attribution, right? Like your authentication might run off of tokens or something, right? So you don't know who that customer is authenticating into or what is like really actually starting to build the ecosystem. So attributions is like a big part in understanding how you're actually going to do that. I like second to that, like I start to think about your quality and quantity side of it, right? Like for your business, you can start to think about what is the influence of revenue, be it new business, retention, expansion, right? You can start to get deeper into the accounts with an apps per account. But then you start to think about like, what is the value to that customer, right? As Scott's pointed out, like, is that app actually doing well? Are they getting like positive feedback? Are they seeing strong month-over-month connections and growth, right? What is the average lifespan of a connection to that app? I don't think you can look at one without the other, right? Like balancing what is quantity and quality with that. I'll pause there. Yeah, like I could go deeper, but like I certainly think about like attribution on top of that, and then like what does it mean for the business? What does it mean for the customer, the partner as well, and kind of like where do you actually balance those two?
Yeah, I'd say it's. I agree. It's certainly a challenge compared to just one's own products, and sort of the direct, way in which we instrument that. I think from our perspective, like there are just so many correlated metrics that are in aggregate clear where the value is, and you can sort of hone in on, different things from, retention, customer dollar retention, NPS, attachment to, when deals are closing, how many things get integrated, at sale or at onboarding, and so you can start to like, connect these dots, but, actually being able to say, okay, it is worth X amount is really, really hard. And again, I think this is why, as Shay said, it kind of ties back to that first question of yours. Like at the end of the day, if this is what's making customers happy, and you can get that feedback very clearly, from them on a variety of measures, then you're like, okay, well, it's kind of integrated into the value proposition of what our company is here to do. I mean, we don't break out the value of individual features, in each sort of product and try and like, get carried away with, well, hey, we added this new item into the, menu bar and here's the impact it had, but we know in aggregate, yeah, this actually really does move the needle.
I think we also started seeing some really interesting things where customers that were also using several integrations were stickier. And so we actually found that when you become super integrated into their workflow by being part of all of the products they use in their day-to-day life, you end up with this incredible sort of stickiness and kind of lifetime value of that customer that you might not if they're not using some of the integrations there. So I thought that was a fascinating insight that we started looking at more and more to measure the ROI of those.
Awesome. And I think, I believe it's Heidi, but I think everyone agrees that like having it be a part of the corporate culture makes it easier to sort of, in early days before there's a lot of data to track, get everyone bought in. And I find it to be interesting when you can tie this into a lot of different departments. It may be one of the only, not the only, but it's one of the things in a tech company that really touches a lot of different organizations. So you have marketing, biz dev in some capacity, partnerships, product and engineering. And I'm curious, we were talking to Scott about this before you guys joined, about kind of the org structure and where does technology partnerships and where does sort of the nuts and bolts that go into this roll into within an org structure? I'm curious what you guys have seen be successful. Heidi, it looks like you've got some thoughts.
Well, I think we sort of evolved it over time, so over the 4 years that I was at Fox, we sort of started with, at least on the engineering side, everything was very centralized. So we had an application, we had a few engineers that said, can you go turn our capabilities into APIs? And we were sort of reverse engineering how everything was going to work. And then over time, we said, listen, actually, everybody who owns the capability needs to own their own APIs. And then we will do the sort of value add on top of that, the developer experience, sort of onboarding, documentation, higher level widgets that are composed out of those APIs and things like that. On the business side, I feel like it was in business development the whole time, but we did of course, have then product managers that were fully focused, and we started to separate things like the long tail of tech ecosystem from the strategic partnerships, or even the products the integrations that you would build first party, because perhaps that partner wasn't going to partner with you, but you could certainly use their APIs to tie things together. So I think we sort of evolved and became much more mature over those 4 years to really understand kind of the nuances and differences between the different kinds of partners that we had.
Yeah, this is better. I'll add on this. I've seen so many different versions of org structures around tech partnerships. I mean, for example, at Twilio, we were reporting to the revenue office, the CRO. At Google, the tech partnerships, when I was there, reported into a separate alliances org that was a parallel team to the sales organization. At Cisco, it was all over the place, right? And then you talk to different startups, they kind of, a lot of times they either put them into, the product side or just reporting to the COO, for example. But I don't know if there's really truly the right place for tech partnerships. I think it's all about being intentional about what you're trying to do from a go-to-market, and what type of partners are you actually bringing in, what problems you're solving for your customers. So, depending on the size of the size of the company as well, I think also dictates how the roll-up goes in and what kind of cross-organizational collaboration you can actually enable. I think that's probably the most important piece in this, is because you're talking product engineering, marketing, sales, solutioning, et cetera, et cetera. So it's about getting that figured out more so than I think the organizational structure.
It hits on like your first question, Cristina, right? Like, how do you make it part of the culture? And to me, like, done well, it's embedded in everyone's jobs. You might have a partnership team somewhere in the org that helps organize some of this, but more so they're bringing together all of the different groups, right? Engineering, product design should be thinking about how to build an extendable platform. Every single one of those teams probably have APIs they need to manage. They're probably going through that build by partner scenario. You get into marketing, right? Revenue marketing is probably helping doing some paid ads and outreach, right? Corporate marketing is probably doing the press release and social to it. Product marketing is probably doing the enablement or the nurturing. So it's not even to say like there's a partner marketer, like that person's probably going to other marketing managers in the company. Getting that into the culture, like it truly becomes everyone's job to really think about that scenario. And that's where I see it work really well, and organizations start to have success through their ecosystems.
Awesome. And I think this can actually lead into a question that I'm seeing kind of hinted at in a lot of the questions from the audience around prioritizing integrations and deciding like, what do you build? What do you sort of buy? What do you outsource? What do you rely on your partners to build? I think that's like a really large question, but I'm curious if you guys have any frameworks that you've seen be successful. Like, product me is always like value effort, but the value is sometimes a little more nebulous in this space. So I'm curious what you guys have seen work well.
I'll start with this one here. It's as cliche as it may sound. Listen, figure out what your customers want first and foremost, and how they want to go and consume this, right? If I'll give you an example. We had I was responsible for the data protection ecosystem at Google, and we had technical blockers, that were not necessarily blocking us from that one specific solution, but more broadly, hey, I need to actually have this type of integration enabled if you want me to bring in my applications to the cloud. So there was a multiplier kind of effect that was happening that was being blocked. And at that point, it becomes a decision of, hey, can we build it? Sure. How long of time to market ultimately, right? And long story short, we ended up actually acquiring one of the ISVs, but I think that was part of what prioritized. That definitely was one of the reasons why we prioritized certain integrations versus others based on the opportunity or the influenced opportunity, which again, but back to the earlier point, it's even more hard to kind of quantify, but at least you'll have that hearing your customer knowing that, hey, I need to bring X amount of workloads into the cloud, but I need this type of integration. That moves things internally. So, and then beyond that, it's time to market, right? Figure out what you're trying to do and what your customers will consume, and then go from there and prioritize it.
Go ahead, Scott.
One thing I appreciate in the question there too is that it's not just the moment of build, because there's a certain calculus you use for like, oh, okay, well, what could I do if I was building it right now? I could, even outsource, bring in some contract developers. And I think sometimes what gets lost in the early days of people going down that road is really thinking far enough ahead to say like, okay, well, what is the support side of this? What is the maintenance side of this? What's even the expectation of what a great integration is going to be? Because as I'm sure everyone on this call knows, is like people say, oh, does X integrate with Y? The answer is almost always yes today. Like somehow there's a way to get X and Y in the cloud to talk to each other, but the spectrum of what that integration is like can be very, very broad, and it has a huge impact on whether customers are actually happy with the way it works. And so I think bringing more of that view into that decision of saying, okay, this isn't just build a quick integration for a quick go-to-market. This is like, how does this fit into our long-term commitment to supporting that capability? And if we're not going to do that, the way it really needs to be done, then it really is better to even like wait a little bit longer for the other partner to take ownership of that.
Yeah, I would say definitely that same calculus around maintenance. And although I think there were times where we built initial integrations partly to test our own capabilities, like would this actually work? And eventually, maybe the first one was not strategic, but the partner said, hey, that one's not really great. Can we take over ownership of it? And so it was an awesome way to get them to come to the table. And I think we did do that more strategically later to say, we'll build a first version of them to show the art of the possible and get them to come to the table and potentially be a strategic partner going forward. But early on, it was really like the quality started degrading and they said, hey, wait a minute, we would like to participate because our brand's on the line too. So that was an interesting approach.
If I can add to that point, you bring up a really, really interesting point, Heidi, right? It's always the whole, oh, if you're going to go and build this ultimately yourself as a vendor, you're going to, the partners are not going to be in the best place. Well, not necessarily, right? And I think one of the things that true, really great partnerships is having that honest conversation, having that adult conversation, as like, or come to Jesus discussion to say, all right, guys, here's what we're doing. Here's what we're thinking. And then actually build this thing with them. And figure out what is that line of delineation between what you're doing, where you are in the stack, to where they are with the stack. I mean, we're having these conversations when, for example, Cisco Meraki and some of the ISVs that were in that ecosystem. And obviously the ISVs bring that value out on top of the infrastructure. So having that honest conversation, and sometimes it's, it's a piece of the pie, we're going to actually have this type or this part of the segment, the customer segment, the customer, the market. And you guys own this piece of it. We're not going to touch it, but having that conversation up front with the partners is crucial. To Scott's point, early in the process, right? Not after you kind of made those decisions.
It's important. Like every integration is a product in and of itself, right? Like Heidi, you called this out. It's like once you build it, more feature requests comes. Could the integration do this? Could it do that? So I think the same way you think about prioritizing how you build an integration should be done in the exact same vein as how you would go out and build a new product, right? Like, and measure those against one another, because it's not as if like you build it, you set it up and it's good to go for its life. Like it is going to grow and evolve. There is definitely like a level of nurture and maintenance to go with it.
Yeah, I totally agree with that, Shay. I actually think that PMing and designing integrations is often harder than the build because there's so many external dependencies. And if you're building against a best in breed API, like it's well documented, you sort of understand what you're looking at, but oftentimes there could be a little bit of a black box element. And I do find too that when you ask customers, like, what do you want that Salesforce integration to do? They will say everything. So you sort of have to have like an opinionated idea of like what you want this thing to do based on your own customers kind of use patterns. And I find that that's really a challenging place for a lot of PMs and like traditional product management backgrounds. They're used to being able to just build whatever they want. This is like, no, you have a lot of constraints on either side. Cool. We have a whole bunch of questions. So I may start going through some of these just because we've got a whole lot of them. And this actually kind of speaks to a couple other questions that we had in advance of this. So somebody asked, how do you enable the developer and partner community, to build on top of your platform and bring them into the fold?
I will say that ActiveCampaign, we have a number of different ways to do this. I think standard to most folks, like we have an open API, right? Where folks can go in, get a sandbox account and just start to build their own integration. Thinking about like, what is like the actual user experience of that? How do we make that easier? Like, how do we influence the rate of integrations that could be built as well as the depth of them into our like actual platform? We've built out a product like, and then staffed an entire team around what we call an app studio. So it's an in-browser kind of IDE that lets them write a config file that gives them direct access into like that account, right? And they can deploy and launch those apps into our marketplaces. They can manage all of their marketing assets through it, like a true like easy way to, expand the layer of who can build integrations into our platform. Still technical by nature, right? But it's not as if like, I have to use the APIs. I got to go get a server to launch a service to like start to do authentication across those. We started to think about what are all the hurdles we've seen in people launching and trying to deploy apps. How do we get rid of those and let them get straight to like the meat and potatoes of the connectivity and like the path between the two platforms? So we spend a lot of time actually like granularly going through that level of like, how do we extend our own platform's capabilities by allowing others to do exactly that?
I would agree with that. I think it's interesting looking at like the community of people who are either building integrations or even building apps specific for a particular platform. Is there are two different levels to this. There's the technical level, and you're right. It sounds pretty simple. Like, well, you need the open APIs and you need the documentation and the examples and all that. Actually executing that, it turns out, right, it is not as easy as it sounds. But yes, that's the goal with all of that. But there's this other dimension to it of just helping these companies be successful with their integrations or apps. Because to your point earlier, like even from a PM perspective, like this is still kind of a new thing. And so particularly being able to provide some guidance and to think about, okay, as you build this, how do you acquire your first beta testers in another customer's ecosystem, another platform's ecosystem? How do you think about the way in which you'll support like a go-to-market, within that ecosystem? We actually did an experiment about a year and a half ago. We kicked off a series of these app accelerators where we would take a small cohort of developers who were committed to creating something. We'd pair them with some of our product people, some of our go-to-market people, and try and just actually work through that entire exercise with them. And that proved to be an incredibly successful program because it was trying to take a little bit more of a holistic approach to, not just thinking about the technical aspects of how do we make these two things work, but how do you really get a holistic plan of what you're going to launch in this ecosystem and make it successful.
I wonder too, Scott, with that, the accelerators that you guys were doing, I bet you got a lot of great insights about like your own API and some limitations and potential enhancements that other tech companies were interested in by like giving them direct access potentially to, I would assume, one of your like dev advocates or maybe some of your engineers.
Yeah, actually, you've now exposed me for my secret master plan. So half of the app accelerators was helping to imbue this knowledge into our ecosystem. The other half was actually deeply embedding these ecosystem experiences into the heads of our PMs and GMs, and yeah, it was very successful in that dimension too.
Love it, Heidi. I wonder if you have thoughts. I see you nodding your head.
Well, I mean, you said dev advocates, and I feel like that's a piece that people, if you haven't done this before, realizing the role that they play. I feel like it's such an amazing conduit of both at Box and earlier at Adobe, we had these incredible dev advocates who would be out there talking with customers, but also playing it with the product themselves all the time and figuring out, what can I hook together? And hey, I found this new service that's really cool that seems to be, hot in the community, and how can we connect into that? Or maybe how can we partner with them and be at their conference talking to their developers and things like that. And so I just always appreciated that sort of that cutting edge mentality and, sort of speaking truth back to the team about how good is your platform really, and is it really usable or not, or what the gaps are. And so I just loved feeling almost like you had a customer in-house all the time who was really be able to speak from that community and then back to that community as well. So just a huge lever as far as I've seen.
Yeah, you're speaking my language. Folks that know me know that I am a huge advocate for that role, like the forward deployed engineer, or whatever you want to kind of call it, especially sooner rather than later, because it is, if you find the right person, it really is the voice of the customer. And you end up sort of, in my experience, having like a little bit of a PM in that person saying like, I know that we think it should work like this, but like I actually use it as a user and it should maybe actually do this other thing. Super valuable person within an organization, I think. Cool. Anyone else have thoughts on that? If not, I'll go to the next question. And again, we've got a bunch of these questions, so I'll ask Kelly to screenshot these so we can throw them into the Slack and keep the conversation going. This actually comes up a lot. So how do you communicate about integrations internally and externally? Anyone? Who's got it? There.
Oh, man. The bigger the organization, the harder it gets, right? And even a smaller organization, I would say. And my point of reference is obviously working with ISVs and startups in the bigger companies, but also kind of a smaller size company than the traditional ones that I've been in. You have to be really deliberate about how you actually, have those communications. You have to, first and foremost, have that interlock between product and the partners, right? That's one. But then when you have the integration, I think that's where the question is really stemming from. Hopefully you're having these discussions and figuring out that framework of communication beforehand. But putting in place the right governance with the sales teams. How do you educate these sales teams? Is there like an internal wiki or some site that they go to, microsite, for all things integrations? Is it part of our external customer product page or solution page where we define and showcase these joint integrations? As simple as it sounds, right? Having these cadence calls, right, with the right stakeholders, technical and non-technical, depending on what part of this enablement you're trying to achieve. Having those cadence calls is very critical. That's the. I don't know if I would call this. There's no one size fit all. I think it's just based on what are the resources they have available, what are the different organizations you have internally that you need to drive that awareness and enablement to, and then from a market perspective, I think is probably the most important. And that's part of celebrating that ecosystem that you're building, is positioning these integrations in a way that can be, from an awareness perspective, can be consumed maybe even, right, through a portal or marketplace, or just, hey, here's a data sheet on our integration with this partner for, the solution off of the page that you just visited. So yeah, I'll defer to some of my colleagues here if they have any thoughts on that as well.
I guess just remembering back a little bit about sort of communicating externally. I guess maybe this isn't exactly the same thing, but figuring out. So what I was going to say was at Adobe, we would, this is dating myself a little bit, but in advertising the Flash player, we actually, at that point of download of the Flash player, you could actually highlight someone who was building something really cool with Flash, and it had an amazing impact and benefit for them. But it sort of, I don't know, like it helped sort of get the flywheel going of like, well, if there's that, what else is there? And what else can I do with the Flash player? And so I think there's that opportunity to do sort of co-marketing, or to really highlight wins to seed the rest of not just the ecosystem, but also raising awareness with your customers to be leveraging these integrations. Again, if you feel like integrations is a key aspect of growth or lifetime value or renewals or whatever it is. So I think there's something interesting around how to be thoughtful about rotating and highlighting all of the really cool integrations that you have in your ecosystem, because I think it is easy to get lost when you have like all the ones in the marketplace. Like, how do you find the ones that really stand out? And just, I think it's a cool opportunity to sort of show them some love, and actually reflects back and I don't know, improves your ecosystem at the same time.
Yeah, to take that question like two different ends of it, internal and externally. But you mentioned this, like there's no one size fits all. Like I always say, like it's not a binary answer. There's not one way to do this. Internally, it's like, what are the normal operating mechanisms or processes to make that very predictable? So when folks are trying to learn what are new product updates, what are the new integrations, or where's the enablement or the one pagers on these, like that should be easy for them to find and kind of access. Externally, I'm always thinking about like, what's unique about that partner and ourselves that allows us to have a more unique go-to-market strategy or evergreen strategy. I don't like, we could do the normal email marketing and cross-posting tweets or something like that, but like, I'm always looking for like, well, what is unique to that partner that allows us to go into a different channel or a different way? Or what is like, what's in their company's top line plan at the moment that like we can kind of attach ourselves to get more carry through there versus trying to get them to do just something extra or on the outside of like what they are focused on currently. So I was going to get a bit more opportunistic than the external approach.
I think I agree with all of this. I think just one way we've sort of crystallized it is looking at a spectrum between push and pull. That really at scale, you need all these mechanisms for whether it's customers or sales or CS people to be able to pull, the right information. You just can't push it all. It's just way too much. But the push side is incredibly valuable. And I think the two cases where it's really valuable, certainly for your most strategic integrations, where it just needs to be embedded in anyone who talks, someone says like, yes, I understand how these two things work really well together. But, with your example, Heidi, from Flash there, I think it's also helpful to use those push channels to like, just pick and choose like a few examples of things that are further down in the long tail to just even get people thinking like, oh, wow, I didn't even know that's possible. The secret is just making sure all those push mechanisms are all designed to keep driving people back to the standardized pull mechanisms, because that's the worst thing. Is like if someone's like, looking for some sort of integration or solution and they're like, well, I guess I'll just turn to Google at this point.
I guess just on that point about pull mechanisms, I do think that developers have evolved in the last 20 years to assume there's something already out there that does what they want, as opposed to assuming they have to build it from scratch. And so I think that's like an interesting shift in development. I mean, just really quick story. I started up a couple years ago. I was coding again for the first time in 15 years. And I was like, oh, 15 years ago, we didn't have Google or Stack Overflow or open source. And now like the mentality of developers is, that already exists. I don't need to build it from scratch. And so I appreciate that and feel like that is a huge opportunity for APIs and platforms these days, because they actually will find you.
The nicer you make it for the developers, the better your ecosystem will be. Cool. So we just got about 3-ish minutes left, but I did want to touch on this. This came up a few times at a high level, monetization. So how do you determine what to charge for, or what integrations to charge your customers for, how to monetize your partnerships, referral agreements? Like, what is the sort of rubric that you go through to determine how you're going to make money with these things?
I can go first, I guess. Yeah, so at HubSpot, we made a very conscious decision to not monetize the ecosystem directly at this point. We felt the value of getting customers connected and getting the whole flywheel of the ecosystem around the platform just had far more value than the direct revenue that, okay, if, we sell it to you directly through this marketplace, we want this cut of it. Everyone makes their own choices on that. But again, I think it's sort of like everything else we were talking about. Doing a global optimization rather than just a local optimization is usually the better way to go.
Just a couple thoughts, certainly now at Grammarly and previously at Box as well, I feel like we had the benefit where there's a free version of the product, but there's also a paid version of the product. And so you end up with a lot of different interesting levers about how you can monetize, because you can decide, well, maybe in this particular scenario, getting upgrades and referrals to a paid product is more important, whereas in this other scenario, they're building something purely with the APIs, and maybe they're even reselling that product. And so they would rather pay for API usage than to worry about, reselling and stuff. So maybe that was just partly we had such a broad set of capabilities for developers that they weren't all integrations. Some of them were, apps that just using our APIs almost in a white labeled way. But I think that's an interesting lever, that if you have that ability, you can actually have a combination and monetize in both ways. And maybe there's even a free version as well. So.
This topic could be a panel in itself. I honestly believe we're at kind of a strategic inflection point here. You're seeing a lot of companies actually change their models around this. You see it a bunch on like the B2C side. So Google, Microsoft, Apple have certainly changed theirs. I think you're seeing it more starting to creep into that B2B side. Like Shopify recently reversed a lot of their revenue share models. I don't think we've seen the end of this. I think there's far more companies that are going to be changing this. I've even seen some of our partnerships starting to flirt or hint around at different ideas of ways that we can make this work that aren't just pure revenue shares. Because the revenue shares, they're generally speaking, they're not very reciprocal or even or fair across orgs, right? Someone's generally winning that argument. And that's disincentivization to actually want to build into an ecosystem, right? To understand you'd be giving up some revenue to that. I think to Scott's point, doing it more, I forget that you said local versus global, if I recall the words correctly. I think when you monetize it, doing it based off usage or features and doing that across all integrations, not just one per se. So API calls would be a great way to do that. Gating certain features of your platform into integrations of different types or to plan tiers, et cetera. That's probably going to be the way to go about it, more so than saying, hey, for this integration, we're going to charge you as a customer, or trying to extend or pass through some revenue share. It just gets too tricky in that scenario. And I don't think it's confusing to customers in the end of that, right? So you want something that's easy for them to understand, doesn't burden them with cost, but also doesn't disincentivize people from building into your ecosystem all at the same time.
Yeah, I 100% agree, Shay. I also feel like the tolerance for paying for them is quite low, because so many best in breed companies offer apps for free. So, to then ask your B2B buyer to then pay what is probably a really nominal amount of money, to access that app seems like more trouble than it's worth, and not in the interest of ecosystem more generally. But cool. So we are at time. I really appreciate all of you guys taking time out of your day to be a part of this panel. We have a lot of good questions still. We'll try to throw those all into the Slack channel. This is also recorded. I believe we'll throw it on our website, but if you guys need it, you can shoot Kelly, Liz, or I a Slack in the Ecosystem Alliance. And if you're not a part of the SaaS Ecosystem Alliance, our website, SaaSecosystemalliance.com. You can apply to join there. We have a great network of awesome people like the folks that you see right here today. Really appreciate it, you guys, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
Everyone.
Thank you.
Take care.